Thanks to everybody for being here today. Few quick housekeeping things, and then I'll get right into the presentation today. First of all, Margie in the back. Margie is the Vice President of the Red River Valley Asperger Autism Network. She is going to be our surrogate frontal lobe today, and you will know more about what I'm talking about later on, who will help with time management because we want to make sure that we have plenty of time to get through. So panelists and for me to hurry us along, look to Margie and she will let us know about how things are going. I also want to acknowledge that we have happy birthday cookies for Joanne, who is the president of the Red River Valley Asperger Autism Network. So happy birthday, Joanne, and the first day of spring. So aren't we excited about that? Let me see what else. We are going to be videotaping primarily to the panelists and to me. If you do not want to be on camera, if you ask a question, you may submit it in writing, or please let us know. Other than that, no one in the audience should be on video. What we're going to be doing with these later is posting them to the website so that folks who are unable to be here, maybe if you want to review something, you will be able to go back and take a look at all of the information. I think folks know food in the back, the bathrooms are right across the hallway, and thank you ever so much for being here today. We're very appreciative of this. So what the format's going to be for today is I'm going to be a really fast talking head for a little bit to try to get through the information that's in the PowerPoint that we have copies of on the back table, so if you didn't get one, please take one. And then we're going to turn it over for questions to the panelists. So usually I do presentations much more informally where we can do a lot back and forth while I'm talking. For today, simply because I really want to give the opportunity for our panelists to be able to give you as much information as they can, I'm going to go through my formal part of the presentation much more quickly. So can I save introduction? You guys have a microphone over there too. Did you see it? Or are you sitting on it now?
No, it's on the table.
Okay. So we
can talk really loud too.
Yes, you can do that as well. Again, welcome. The essence of autism is in the brain. And that is a quote by Peter Vermeulen, who has written an amazing book called Autism as Context Blindness. I'm actually really excited because I get to go hear him speak in a couple of weeks. And that's really what today's conversation is all about. It's about executive skills. So if you could ask yourself some of the questions like, how did you get here today on time? What would you have done if 4th Street had been closed due to construction? Why are you sitting where you are? You need to have dinner ready at 7. How would you get it done on time? How would you know what to buy at the grocery store? There's a ticking clock in the room where you typically read at your house, but you don't hear it. Why is that? You go to a funeral and start to whisper. Why? Someone bumps into you and you don't swear at them. They apologize, you smile and say, well, that's okay. Why? Taxes are due soon. How do you know what to do? The answer is simple: executive functioning skills. We all have executive functioning skills and they all vary in different degrees. Some of the executive functioning skills in terms of definition it's an umbrella term for cognitive functioning. It's mental skills that are coordinated in the frontal lobe of our brain. I've got a great little color picture of a brain in a couple of slides. They're referred to as the CEO or the conductor of the orchestra. They direct and control perceptions, thoughts, actions, and emotions. They are multiple in nature and not a single capacity. They cue other mental abilities. When executive functioning breaks down, behavior becomes poorly regulated. And there's going to be a little bit off, I think, on your PowerPoint because my executive functioning skills broke down a little bit in doing this, and I did a different copy on a different presentation. So we're going to go by this. So it's not going to follow what you have exactly. I moved a couple of slides around, but it will be close to what you have. The other thing to remember about executive skills when I talk a little bit more about what they are is, again, it's not just singular. They have to work in concert with each other. So if you think about your frontal lobe as being the conductor of the orchestra, that's the part of your brain that has to regulate a lot of different skills and activities all at the same time. So simply to self-regulate, you need a number of different skills. You need to be able to perceive the situation, initiate action and conversation, inhibit, on and on and on. Shift thoughts, shift activities, manipulate information. You know, people always talk about manipulation as being a bad thing. I think if people know how to manipulate really well, it's a great thing, because you're demonstrating great functionability of some of your executive skills. So whenever people say, well, I think he's just manipulating, I think, I wish he was. Because if there's an action that you can pick up on, they're not doing it very well. And that's an indicator that there's some skill deficit going on. Other things that you need to do, simply to self-regulate. You need to plan, generate, associate, choose, balance what's going on, have a sense of time, have time management skills, monitor, understanding how your words and actions are impacting others in the room. These are all skills that you need to do just to self-regulate. So if you imagine, as I was going through this, I'm thinking about myself sitting in and for those of you who are teachers, you know what I'm talking about, sitting in some school meetings, which sometimes can be very trying, and parents understand this too. We are all having to use our executive functioning skills in terms of self-regulation doing that. So executive skills develop and change throughout your lifetime. They're often recognized through behaviors, and they do not develop evenly. They are also impacted by things that happen sometimes moment to moment. Executive skills can be impacted by stress. If you're not feeling well, if you're distracted by something, if you have sensory issues, age, gender, a lot of things will impact executive skills. So sometimes you may be able to do something very well one day and not so well the next. And that's because there are so many different factors that play in to our executive skills. My picture of the brain, and you can see where the frontal lobe is and all the different parts of the brain that are involved in that. This is a picture. Folks familiar with Temple Grandin? Yes. Every year she does a functional MRI, and this is actually her hand pointing at what the neurons look like for someone with an autism spectrum disorder. And you can see that they are significantly different. There are many more connections going on. One of the things that makes information processing and executive functioning much more difficult for somebody who has an autism spectrum disorder than for people who are neurotypical. And you can really see quite a big difference between those two. And she says, for some of us with ASDs, the emotional relatedness, physical or biochemical circuitry is missing. No matter how hard we try, it's a bridge that may never be built because some of the basic building materials are missing. Executive functioning is important to understand because it's a big difference between people who can't and people who won't. Understanding that when you make demands on someone and they can't perform the skill, you get a very negative reaction to that. And the more you push, if it's something that they are unable to do, the bigger reaction you're going to get. And it's not because they don't want to. There is a reason for every behavior. What I have to say, and I'm going to talk about my friend Kate, I had on one of your handouts I had typed and I had sent it off to the panelists to take a look at, thinking that I had it done, and there were a number of mistakes that I had on the handout. And this could be perceived in many ways. Had it gone out the way it was, you could have thought a number of different things. You could have thought, well, did I not care that I gave you the correct information? Am I careless? Was I being unprofessional? Instead, what was going on is I was distracted. And I had thought that I had double-checked for careless mistakes, and I laughed out loud as Kate had sort of put off to the side all of the changes I need to make. And when I got to one of the executive skills about doesn't check their work, off to the side she said, "Oh, the irony." So I laughed out loud and was so appreciative that she did. And again, people could have perceived that I didn't care. The truth is I got distracted and moved on and forgot that I hadn't gone back to double check again. So having appropriate assumptions about why people do things and struggle with executive skills is really important to understanding that. I love Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin, what are you doing to the coffee table? Is this some sort of trick question or what? So clearly, asking those kinds of questions and having an understanding is all about perception and executive skills. So what are some of the executive skills? We have working memory and recall, the ability to hold facts in memory while manipulating information, accessing facts, following instructions, summarizing. And I apologize, the font is really, really tiny on your handout. So I will forward this presentation to the network, and hopefully we can post it on our website so that you'll be able to see it a little bit more clearly if it's difficult for you to see it in this really small font, or I'll be happy to forward a copy of the presentation to you. Attention and impulse control, getting started on a task, paying attention to things of varying interest, finishing work, sustaining attention on a task. So Calvin again. Look, it's almost 11 o'clock. Wow, the last 2 hours really flew by. I hope the teacher didn't say anything important. So sometimes even appearing like we are paying attention doesn't mean that we're really getting the information that's necessary. And some of us have developed a skill to look like we're paying attention, to look like you're making eye contact, to look like you are interested in what someone is saying, when in fact your attention is absolutely somewhere else. Self-monitoring, and this is a really interesting one, because self-monitoring is about understanding the impact that one's words and behaviors have on others. In the world of autism spectrum disorders, this would be called theory of mind. That ability to understand that I can see something from someone else's perspective. I understand that people have different thoughts, different feelings, different beliefs than me, and it's okay. It's really a very complicated and miraculous ability, and one that many of the folks I know struggle with quite significantly, and this can happen in varying degrees. Again, keep in mind executive functioning can happen in varying degrees and can even change sometimes day to day. Internalizing language, being able to direct future actions, control behavior by self-talk, internal self-talk. A lot of the kids that I work with do external self-talk. It's an executive skill that's partially proficient, and now we just need to get that language to be inside. I think if they're doing self-talk problem solving, hallelujah. And whether it's outside or inside voice, that is a huge, huge skill for somebody to be able to have. Organization, pretty self-explanatory. Controlling emotions, and this is a big one that majority of kids, I think, get identified and sent for assessments because of difficulty controlling emotions and behaviors. So emotional regulation, frustration tolerance, thinking before acting or speaking. So we have the bully who says, I'm going to pound you at recess, Twinkie. You'd better be nice to me, Mo. How? Why? Because someday my tax dollars will be paying for your prison cell. How? My whole problem is my lips move when I think. So this would be an example of not thinking ahead of what the consequences of what you say might have for you. Mental flexibility and shifting. Again, this is something that is extremely difficult for most of the kids and adults that I work with. Getting stuck. And I keep saying if anybody can figure out how to unstick, they're going to make $1 million. Because that is huge. And getting stuck is getting stuck on thoughts. I'm thinking about nothing but trains all day, every day. I'm stuck because you told me that we were going to be going to Toys R Us, and I get a new Hero Factory, and I'm stuck on that, and I can't think or do anything else. I am stuck because you told me that there's going to be a substitute teacher today, and I don't know how to do that. Stuck thoughts, stuck behaviors, having to do things in routine, rituals, things that are repetitive over and over the same way. And if something changes or alters, it becomes very difficult to do, generally resulting in a meltdown. And even if you can get somebody to shift, they may almost boomerang right back to that stuck thinking, that special interest. So mental flexibility and shifting, very important executive skill, one that's extremely difficult. Metacognition or central coherence is what this is called. This is being able to see the big picture from smaller details. Lots of the folks I know are very good at figuring out the details, not so good at seeing the big picture. The whole idea of seeing the forest for the trees. They will see the trees, the moss growing on the tree, the bug crawling up the tree, and not necessarily recognize that that big picture is all about forest and that there's something more to it. Adaptive behavior, the ability to change from one behavior depending on the situation that you're in. Remember the question that I asked in the beginning about if you walk into a funeral and you start whispering, you walk into a library and you start whispering? That's adaptive behavior. I understand immediately that I am in a setting that requires a change in my behavior. Lots of folks on the spectrum have a great deal of difficulty making that kind of change and alteration. It's one note. I am who I am all day, every day, regardless of the setting that I'm in. That's an executive skill. So again, Calvin, what on earth am I doing here on this beautiful day? This is the only life I've got, and he runs screaming out of the room. And the teacher says, next time, try a drink of water and a few deep breaths. Most of us have probably considered doing this when we're sitting in meetings. You may be thinking this right now, but no one's doing it. For the folks who struggle with executive skills, this is likely to actually happen. And I know that there are some in this room who are nodding and relating that indeed this is what they've seen, is somebody who bolts from the room. Because that ability to adapt becomes too great and too overwhelming. Time management, pretty self-explanatory. I recently had a young man who was serving detention because he couldn't get to his classes on time. Wasn't because he didn't care about his classes. Wasn't because he didn't think that school was important. Wasn't because he liked disrupting the class when he went in. It's because he couldn't manage his time. He couldn't figure out how to get to his locker and get what he needed and get back to the classroom on time. So the alternative was he either carried all of his books with him all day, which they wouldn't let him do because he couldn't have a backpack at his school, or he was late to class. And we'll talk about interventions in a little bit. Initiating, starting projects independently, controlling behavior, talked a little bit about that, and problem solving, which is so complex, I kind of just left that. Problem solving, whether it is making a choice, dealing with a social situation, especially social situations become very difficult. Human behavior is unpredictable. Human behavior changes depending on who you're dealing with. There is no predictability, no consistency, and no stability when we have to do problem solving that involves other people. So problem solving becomes quite a challenge. So although troubled as a child, Zorro, as is well known, ultimately found his niche in history. So his behaviors, which might have created a great deal of difficulty for most people, actually benefited him. So this is, do we take a look at these strengths and build on those with kids, or do we take a look at how do we get rid of the things that may ultimately benefit somebody? So executive problems are found in lots of, everybody occasionally will struggle with executive functioning. No one is exempt from this. So which executive skill deficits do you think are found most often in individuals with an autism spectrum disorder?
Difficulties in social situations, difficulty in interacting with other people, and it's always nice when you can find that one group that understands, at least tries to understand.
Absolutely. Actually, all of them.
Yes.
All of them can. Some of the ones that end up being the most difficult are shifting, impulsiveness, and emotional and behavioral control. What?
Waiting our turn when we know the answer.
Thank you, Dow. I was actually going to ask you, Dow, too, about what would you have done had 4th Street been closed to construction today?
Oh, man.
Yeah, kind of what I thought.
I'd probably tried to go down 7th, because I remember I used to bike down that when I was a kid, so that might be a little bit easier than some of the other streets. but it would have been a significant mental hit, and it might have been to the point where I would have had to pull over and think about it a little bit before going on, just because having that extra stress plus driving, if I had a patch of particularly bad traffic, you know, I would want to have that extra stress. So, but I'm an adult. I know when I get to the point where I can say, all right, let's slow down and take extra time.
So, and that's one of the points is that people don't always recognize their deficits. That's one that you do recognize as a struggle for you. It is very difficult oftentimes for people to recognize when it's an executive deficit, even in myself, about, okay, is this my executive skill starting to struggle a little bit? And I actually joke about it a lot, that the older I get, my working memory isn't anymore. And I've started to have to do different kinds of things. But it takes a while sometimes to have that recognition. Interventions have to happen at the right time, when the person is calm and open to learning. If you try to make a correction or to talk to somebody when they are anxious, escalated, in meltdown mode, save your breath, because it's not going to happen. You have to pick the right time to talk about it. And success leads to success. People do not, I don't care who you are, do not learn from natural or unnatural consequences. And by natural is not doing as well in school, getting a poor grade. Unnatural would be you're going to detention because you can't manage your time. Doesn't make a lot of sense of how that would work. So Ross Greene, one of my absolutely favorite people, Margie talked a little bit about him at the last Lunch and Learn. Really, he's written a couple of books, and I have the references at the end of this. And he really talks about working with kids who have executive functioning deficits. He would call them neurodevelopmental differences. And I just wanted to take some very key points from him. He's actually going to be speaking at the Autism Conference next October, which is going to be really very exciting, because the way that he talks and thinks and works with kids makes a lot of sense. So behind every challenging behavior is an unsolved problem or a lagging skill. Kids don't wake up in the morning to try to think about how they can make your life miserable today. They end up in a situation where the demands of their environment exceed their resources at the time. And that's really important to understand, because at the time, maybe you did it really well yesterday, but today you're tired. Today somebody said something to you that was mean on the bus. You're finding out that you have to do some work in labs next week. I mean, there can be a lot of different things that impact your ability to be successful. One needs to determine what skill the child is lacking so that that skill can be taught. One needs to determine the triggers, antecedents, the what, who, where, when, why. All of that is really important to know. The goal is to develop a plan with the child that resolves the problem in a realistic and mutually satisfactory manner. Can't tell you how many times when I ask kids about what their biggest challenge is, nobody listens to me. Nobody asked me. Nobody included me. And no matter how young they are, they need the opportunity to be given a voice in what's going on, and to help explain and help us understand what it is they need and what's going on. Part of the handout that I gave, because there are professional assessments for executive functioning, one of the ones that I gave you is one that you can get on Ross Greene's website. It's called the ALSUP, which is the assessment of lagging skills, which is a really sort of quick way to take a look at what types of skills. I always encourage folks to get more professional assessments done too that can take a look more specifically at some of the executive functioning. So interventions, and again, you've got a handout for those. It's different for every child. One size does not fit all, ever. One size may not fit from one day to the next. And that can be very challenging because it keeps us on our toes for knowing what do we need to do at what particular time. So the first thing is the assessment that I was just talking about. Teach the skill and practice in real life over and over. Change the setting so that that skill can be generalized to a different setting. If somebody gets really good at doing something in one setting, it may all fall apart when they're in a different setting. Teach through positive coaching. You may need to increase support in times of change or stress. I got an email from a parent who's, okay, who has a child that's struggling right now? Look around the room. This is a tough time of year. And I got an email from a parent who said, we hadn't been using visual schedules for a very long time. Am I going to have to go back? And I said, this isn't a bad thing. We're not talking about regression. We're talking about additional support at a time that he needs it. And don't we all do that? When we're feeling stressed out or there's something going on, don't we all take a look for something that's created comfort for us in the past? It's not a regression. It's pulling out those tools that worked before and use it again. So that's, and it's really important to understand that. Problem solve, change your approach. It's not the child. If I have kids who don't seem to be moving ahead, it's not the child. It is my plan. And I have a slide about that in a minute. There are two things that we can do with executive functioning. We can teach, and we can find compensatory strategies. Teaching is kind of what I talked about in the first part of the slide. Compensatory strategies is using things like assistive technology. How do I compensate for the skill I'm lacking? I think most of you have heard me tell the story that I used to be really good at knowing what I had in my kitchen, and if I went to the grocery store, I knew exactly what I needed to buy to go home. Now if I walk into Hornbacher's, I have no clue. And I will walk out of there without anything that I need at home. I'm not going to get my working memory back the way that it used to be, because this is not important to me, it's not interesting. I would rather fill my brain up with the things that I really care about, and my groceries really isn't one of those things. So what I do now is when I'm in my kitchen, I've had to teach myself that I grab my iPhone and I dictate onto a grocery list what I need as soon as I run out of it. That's a compensatory strategy. And it's there. So when I go into Hornbacher's, I pull out my phone and there it is. Cues to fit the need. Do intervention, and I love this, doing interventions with everybody, because everybody struggles with executive skills sometimes. There are some great things that can be done in an entire classroom so that everybody gets the opportunity to find some things that work for them, to practice problem solving. Recognizing the difficulties, problem solving, I have a link to Dr. Ross Green's website. Use common interventions in language. I think one of the things that gets very frustrating is that when you've got a plan at school and they're using one language and a different plan at home, and you've got a child with executive functioning who now has to navigate back and forth, tough to do. So having that commonality in language. Learning is a process. Doesn't happen overnight. There's not a clear end to it. Don't give up too soon. Don't make too many changes all at once. Audio or videotape cues might be helpful. Redo mistakes, and I talk about mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. Mistakes are great, not a problem. We can fix mistakes. We can learn from mistakes. It's okay to be making mistakes because a lot of kids are perfectionists, and that's a really hard concept to understand. Support all efforts to correct that. Build in variety and choice. Again, interact positively. Change your lens. Neither the child nor you fail. The strategy is what needs to be looked at. So, you know, Hobbs, some days even my lucky rocket ship underpants don't help. Well, you've done all you can do. So, and then some resources. So I am done being a talking head. Here we also have, as handouts for you, just some examples of some executive skills, some more real-life kinds of examples of what happens when executive skills are not working quite so well, along with some interventions. Thank you, Joanne, for writing up the intervention page with some kind of common kinds of things. So with that, thank you for paying attention. It's really warm in here, isn't it? So apologies for that. This would have been great a couple weeks ago, but it's spring today. So, questions? Is everybody that warm? Well, then I'm going to Actually, if very briefly to start with, I'll start with you, Kate, if you're comfortable talking about some of the executive skills. Some things you do very well, like checking my work for mistakes. That would be a compensatory strategy also, is having someone help you and guide you through things. So, are there things that you have struggled with, either when you were younger or continue to?
Vague, open-ended questions.
Thank you. This is why we're friends. Point well made. Are there executive skills that you struggle with?
Yes? Do I need the radio mic?
No.
Can you hear me? Okay. I don't have a list in front of me.
Would you like a list?
Yes, I would. I would love a list. Thank you. Working memory and all that sort of thing.
Were you not paying attention while you were talking?
Well, that was several slides ago.
You don't have a very good view.
And I, yeah, I don't have very good solid, you know. Right. Okay.
That one. Yeah.
One question I get a lot from family members is, how is this ever going to get better? How do you, not so much can't fix it, but I think like an executive function, how can you strengthen that? What type of therapies? What type of what can you use in life to help strengthen those weaknesses?
And I'd love some feedback from the school folks too, because folks who've been at school meetings with me know that I talk a lot about trying to make executive functioning part of an IEP goal. To really take a look at what might be creating the greatest functional behavior assessment. What's the function? And behind the function of a behavior, in my experience, most often is a lacking executive skill. So what can we do to get everybody working on that? Because it's really about practice. Either it's teaching, is it something that we can teach and practice over and over in different settings with a great deal of success, or is it something that you compensate for? Handwriting, for example, may be a skill that is not necessary to be taught. So is a voice-to-text recognition program better? And to work with school folks who see that and who will understand what's necessary. Because executive functioning is something you don't just need in school, you need it to be employed. You need it to be successful in relationships. You need it throughout your entire life and your entire day. So being able to work together with school setting, I think it's important to work for older folks with employers or with a college, that either that continues to be taught and reinforced, or you find some way to help compensate for what's lacking. Kind of vague? Was that vague?
Well, I'm just thinking, is there like, besides occupational therapy or speech or behavior therapists, am I kind of covering the gamut?
I would say more OT.
OT.
Would folks, school folks, Jen, Nicole, OT?
Yeah, speech, OT.
Yep, speech and OT I think are the two that really address the executive skills the most. Actually, when I do therapy, a lot of what I do is we're practicing executive skills as a part of it. I'll shift. For kids who have trouble shifting, we're going to shift activities. We're going to practice attention. We're going to practice, I'm going to interrupt you and see what happens, because then we can practice that. But that's one setting that needs to be done in a lot of different settings.
I can make one suggestion.
Hang on a second, Dow. What were you going to say, Nicole?
I was just going to say, in my programs, because I teach self-contained, we're working on it
All the time.
day long. I mean, that's just our language that we use all day.
And if you don't have speech or OT services in the school, your special ed teachers should be working on it as well.
Yeah. And for the social piece of it, social thinking, is great because it really ties into that executive functioning as well.
And I used to teach social skills, but now it's just embedded into every moment.
Yeah.
You know, there's just not.
Yeah. And that's really what it needs to be. It shouldn't just be pull-out.
Right.
It needs to be just a part of how you operate.
Okay, I'm going to carry the microphone to whoever has a question so we can pick it up on the video. So just raise your hand and I'll...
Is it on? Should be on. Kate?
Well, my question, well, that's loud.
Yeah, you're good.
My question is, I clearly can see that Emily, my daughter, is lacking in the executive functioning of the impulsiveness, and she is exhibiting a lot of aggressive behaviors at school. If I can see this, and I tell them, this is why you're getting bit and hit, and bookshelves are being knocked over, what is my next step from there to, how do I prove to them that's what, clearly that's what it is, so where's my next step? Where do I go from there to help her in that executive functioning? What doctor, what resource, what's next?
Was it part of a school assessment?
Her school assessment is more of a trying to control the behavior, trying to suppress the behavior. We're not looking at why the behavior is happening. They often say, well, there's no antecedent. Well, her antecedent started at 6 a.m. when she woke up.
Always. And for those of you who know me, you know I believe there is a reason for every behavior.
Every single
and you cannot
behavior.
focus on the behavior. You have to focus on what is causing the behavior.
And we're getting to the point where, and I can completely understand their perspective, but they're to the point where they're just afraid to do anything or interact with her because of an aggressive behavior. So we're not even helping her because we're afraid to do anything. We don't want to put her in the classroom. We don't want to put her here. We don't want to put her there.
And you know, Kate, that's a great question, but I think it's too complicated. So we've got some great school folks in the back. We're in a different district, but could certainly maybe give you some hints about that. So would you be okay? I mean, we'll
That's fine. You can, yeah.
connect.
So the short question is a doctor the next step?
Would you go through a school assessment, or would you have a private assessment?
And who do you have for your school assessments?
Not on IEP.
She is on an IEP. The behavior assessment person was hired by the district, and it's not somebody I necessarily agree with their perspective either, but that's who they have. So,
And as a parent, you have the right to call
That's what I was going to say.
anytime and talk to the team and express your concerns and say, okay, we've got to make a plan here. We've got to figure out, you know, just like Barb said, about the behaviors and why they're causing. You're not focusing on the behavior.
I would throw out functional behavior assessment.
Yeah.
Do you have the right to a second opinion if you disagree?
You can request an independent evaluation,
okay, all right.
and the district would pay for that.
The district pays for that, okay. All right. I think that's another.
Thank you.
My question's answered. Good point. Thank you.
There was something I wanted to add. The general, sometimes if you're trying to solve a particular problem, that's based on executive skill, what you can't do X or whatever, and you're not making any headway solving problem A. Sometimes it can help to solve problems D and E that are also a problem for the child, because that can lower their overall stress level and make it easier to do A. So if you're running up against a brick wall, solving this one problem, you can say, well, maybe if we can solve these other things, maybe it'll drop the overall stress level. And that can really help, because part of the problem, part of the reason why we have trouble with these executive skills is we don't start from neutral. We don't start from everything going fine. You know, if we're interacting with people, we're already got about, you know, we're anywhere from a third to halfway full up on our ability to deal with things just being out in the world. So, you know, it's like you've got a power strip that's got 6 plugins in it, and you think, well, we can run 6 machines off it. Well, we've got 3 machines running just, you know, functioning, getting up in the morning, getting out and talking to people. So we don't have as much room. So making a little bit more space, giving a little more ability to deal with things can often be the key if you're just at a dead end. So
Can you
that,
guys introduce yourselves?
oh, that's right, we never did.
Kate?
I'm Kate.
I'm John.
And I'm Dow.
We are the three amigos.
We're all on the spectrum.
And I
We
get
don't have a TV show yet.
And I get what Dal says. Somebody explained it to me in a nice way too. Is that my daughter wakes up with 7 pots in her kitchen, and they're all need to be stirred all the time. And the big pots and the little pots, and things we changed in the winter was her bedtime, little rituals here and there, and that did help a little bit at school, but obviously not to a great degree. And I still think one of the greatest things you ever taught me, Dal, was that health bar in the video game. Of every time something, the lights are too bright, the smell is too funny, your nose it has a freckle on it that I cannot stop paying attention to, and those are all hits to your video game. And once one hit, one too many, puts you in red, and nothing you can do is going to help you when you're in that red unless you start using your supports to build back up to your green health bar. And that's been one of the things that I try to drum into everybody constantly, because it's a nice visual tool.
Or shields, if you're a Star Trek fan. Captain, the shields are almost down.
So, John, Kate?
What is the question?
I do this all the time. This would be part of what I would practice, and you know, to get that kind of feedback about your question is too vague is something that is very much appreciated. Younger kids don't know that because they don't know what they don't know. They don't know that they're not supposed to understand what you've just asked.
So what were you asking?
What are you asking?
Well, I have a specific question.
Oh, well, okay.
In your adult life, do you ever come to the point where you can physically lose it, where you are tipping over things, or you want to bite somebody, or you can't resist that urge to hit because it feels so much better, like my daughter does at 8? I mean, have you worked to control that? Were you like that as a child? How do you, because I sometimes at 43 find it very hard not to reach out and grab somebody's throat and want to shake them. Do you fight that now as an adult?
I'm not so much as a person that would hurt other people, but I would beat myself up though a lot. And
Punch a wall, that sort of thing.
yeah, I would punch a wall. I would punch a pillow. Those are things that I'm doing now. If I'm really frustrated or something, I do something that wouldn't harm myself or other people. I just punch a pillow. That's
Did it take you a while to, I mean, because I'm guessing a wall feels better than a pillow. Could I assume that, or not necessarily?
Kind of hard on me.
Well, the proprioceptive sensory of it, I guess is what I'm saying. Did you have to teach yourself to hit something not so harmful to yourself?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But it's teachable and it's learnable.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Eventually you discover that you have to repair the wall.
Yeah.
I
And
suppose.
sometimes your hands too.
Sometimes that.
If your hand hurts for a day, then you're going to think, hey, I don't want to do that again.
Can you think of that though when you're overwhelmed that fast, or is that something that you?
It took some time, but
Took
I
some
have
time.
gotten to that point though. If I need to hit something, it's a pillow now. So I've trained myself to do that.
And then would that be an OT thing? Okay.
And again, it's understanding if you're hitting the wall, is it that you're wanting that sensation in? Because that's pretty different.
Or
you
using
know.
up the adrenaline.
I mean, there,
And that's
again,
different,
it's
the feeling
understanding
or
the
the
function.
adrenaline.
I don't hit when I have days like that where I feel that I just cannot take one more breath, that I cannot think one more thought, that I just cannot go on for another minute. I find something extremely physically intensive to do. Go out and turn over the garden by hand. Go up and down the stairs 15 times. Go out and shovel all the snow in the neighborhood, even though I own a snow blower. You work yourself, I work myself until I'm exhausted, because I'm so busy concentrating on the physical labor that it sort of shuts off all the chatter in my mind, and it lets the gears sort of turn, and I usually work out whatever the problem or problems are. Plus, I've, gotten exercise and I've accomplished something.
And also, along those same lines, I also, if I'm really stressed out and I have some problems, I go out for a walk. I use a stationary exercise bike. Yep. I'll get very involved with something on my computer or a video game, something to physically and mentally distract myself. And doing those kind of things will allow you to slowly build back that health bar. And so something that would be something that I know that has always helped me in the past, like walking. I walk every single day, and if I'm having a really tough day, I'll walk a little bit longer. So there are things that I can do to cope and to kind of build back that health bar and think about, so I can try to get past that red zone.
Yeah, there's really two steps here.
Did somebody teach you these things, or are these things you discovered on your own?
Mostly, I discovered them on my own.
Okay.
And you think of, well, what was least disastrous last time? And other ones that I would say, well, I could gradually, it's really unpleasant both to have happen and to look back on afterwards, because it's tremendously embarrassing to be an adult and lose control that way. There's a big stigma associated with that. So it's like, how can I keep this from happening again?
So processing what you did wrong is not helpful.
Well,
with somebody else.
It depends on the person.
It depends.
Okay.
Sometimes it can be something, well, I can't talk about this right now. Maybe in a couple of weeks I can talk to somebody about it. But for example, there's the two steps I think. There's the what do you do right away to get rid of the crisis? And then what is there do you do to build back up? Like say, well, here's an example that where I was driving and someone egregiously violated traffic laws and almost caused an accident, and I had to move out of the way or I was into them, and I didn't run into anything. But after that, I had to stop. And, rather than try to keep driving, I stopped and I screamed a few choice words and I pounded on the seat beside me. And that helped get me through the immediate crisis. And then afterwards, I went home, did some of the physical exercise, played my favorite computer game for a while, and did that. And those were things that I have gradually learned. So, depending on what age your child is at, you can look at them, you can talk to them. If they've got specific things that help, that aren't too destructive, that work, you can go, hey, that works, this is a good thing. Some of these, they aren't, you can't, because you're coming in from the outside as someone else trying to say, what can I do? And at the point where they need them, everything from the outside is at best like Charlie Brown's adult. And at worst, they're evil people poking you with a stick. So it's kind of hard to help from the outside directly. So you kind of have to do it indirectly. But once you get the idea for some of these things, you gradually can build up a repertoire of things that work. And what'll happen sometimes, and that's why one of the things we value is routines and habits.
Yes. Yes.
So in particular, if you're under stress, the more those things are important. It's not necessarily the Lucky Rocket Chip underpants. I don't use Lucky Rocket Chip underpants anymore. I have my leather jacket now. So we each have our little talismans and our little comforts, and they vary by person. They're not going to be the same. So you can't say, well, this is a general thing that works for everybody. But if they find something that works, cherish that, guard that, don't ever take that away, because they need it.
But what if that, this is going to be a question for you. What if then that routine or that comfort becomes something that gets in the way of other things?
You read my mind.
John?
That is a very tough question.
Like for Emily, it's Valentine's Day every day. And so we have Valentine's every day that comes to school, to the amount of You know, you start with one, like, okay, you can bring this one, and then it has more and more and more, and I want to embrace what makes her feel safe and supported, but yet it does get in the way and interfere. Go.
Try to have more than one thing and be able to switch between them.
Over the past few years, I've had to kind of build certain coping mechanisms. Is someone's cell phone ringing?
Yes, it's buzzing.
This is one of those things on here with a, what are these executive skills right now, not being able to shift away from hearing a cell phone ring to being able to speak. Okay, let's see if I can try and get back on track here now. Over the years, I have built up kind of a schedule I do in an everyday routine, but everything that is there was put there for a reason, to deal with something that I was dealing with that was a very difficult part of my life. And so there's a positive look at that, and so I keep on doing that. And like Barb said, sometimes that can get in the way as well, because you have a string of things that you're doing every day that will sometimes a lot of times lead to a late bedtime, getting to bed at a later time. And recently I've been trying to take a few things off and just test the waters, see if I can do that. Sometimes that doesn't work, I put it back in place. But then I'll try a different spot, and I'll take that off and see if that will work. Okay, that worked. I'll try it again the next day. After about a week, it starts to feel comfortable, and I'm able to remove that completely. But you have to take a very small point, just one thing at a time. If you start trying to take 2, 3, 4, 5 times, I can't do that!
Too much at once.
Too much at once.
There is a question in the back. Is that? Go ahead.
One with your hand up.
Yeah.
I guess I had 2 questions. Is for an IEP, when they evaluated my child, they say he isn't enough standard deviations from the norm to qualify him for occupational therapy at school. But all of these things that are on this board that would be occupational therapy, how do I help get him those services? That was my first question. The second one is, are there, like from the panel or other people that are on the spectrum, that are adults that have learned coping mechanisms, that are willing to go to IEP meetings with our son, so we can, yes, you know, because I don't think exactly like my son, and I can advocate for him as best as I can as his mother, and the teachers can educate, you know, advocate for him as best as their experiences and education. But somebody on the spectrum that could say, here, you know, I tried that along the way and it didn't work. I would like, you know, I would like to try that.
The problem with that is that those meetings are pretty hellish. You know, that's sort of an unavoidable thing, because you've got this conflict, you've got, the best I can suggest is they're videotaping this, and we can give that, so being able to take quotes and clips from videos and so forth. And one of the things that the Red River Valley Asperger Autism Network is trying to do is to build up sort of a library of resources like that, so that you can go, okay, you know, we'd like a specific thing like cue cards or a list of, here's these particular problems that these adults on the spectrum said, this works, and this looks real similar to a problem what your son has. And then you can bring that, and then that kind of gives you, you're looking for basically ammunition is what you want at this point.
Or somebody who could, like, from you know, like thinks more similar to my son, but now at a more like mature way of looking at the
Like an
problem,
interpreter?
the solution.
Yeah.
Exactly. That even if they couldn't attend the IEP, could like read the IEP through their own time and say, you know, these are steps that are going to move you forward, or these are steps that are likely not going to improve your situation. Here's why.
So, some of that can work, but a lot of this is pretty individualistic. So I can give you stuff based on my own experience, but you know, like there's going to be some that will go, some things that will be, everybody will go, oh, this is great. And other people go, well, I do this, and John says, well, I do this other thing. And you can see it's accomplishing the same thing, but the way we do it's different. And Kate's going to be, well, that one wasn't so bad for me, this other thing was my problem. So, you know, we're more like cats. Cats are very individualistic. And we have similar kinds of problems, but the way we solve them isn't always the same. So I'm not sure how well that would work. I have had some luck in looking for commonality of problems. You know, I worked with John a little bit when he was first starting out. But it works better when they're already like late teens or adults, because there is a certain level of self-awareness and self-confidence that is not necessarily there when you're younger. Because a lot of my coping mechanisms rely on the fact that I'm quite introspective, and I can sit down and go self-analysis. Okay, what was going on in my brain there? Okay, let's do the checklist and analyze. And okay, oh, and I screwed up this because of a cognitive bias. Oh, and I thought that. Oh, I wasn't paying attention to that. You know, and I can do that analysis. And for somebody else who can do that same analysis, it can be real helpful. But you don't know, because I don't really know. I'm not really an expert at the stages of child development either. So I don't know. You know, well, what's a 7-year-old going to have? What's a 9-year-old going to have? What's an 11-year-old going to have? And that's why I can't say that I would be the best help.
And we are at 1 o'clock. I know there are still some other questions. We will hang around. We will have a follow-up to this. There was so much interest in this topic that we will have a follow-up. And I need to do a welcome to Tony Thoman, Wave, who, for those of you who have been following Specialist Stern in the community, Tony is the new director. And I just wanted to welcome you to our community and look forward to working with you. So,
Can I add? Okay, so one of the things that I want to wrap up with are a couple of things. Number one, getting involved in a parent support group, which we sponsor some parent support activities, but there are other opportunities in the area as well. Checking the website. I learned a lot from Dow about what was going on in my son's brain, or what was possibly going on in his brain when depending on his way of thinking. Checking our website, we're building more and more materials so that we have some of that ammunition, documentation that's coming from the perspective of either adults on the spectrum or research-based information that can support you in those conversations in your schools. Was that? Mm-hmm. So I think that, you know, getting that additional support, I get what you're saying, that you feel like it's just you and how can I, you know, tell them, well, I disagree with what you're saying, or I think there's more to it. Having that additional information can really be beneficial in supporting you. The one last thing I want to leave you with is, if you have additional questions that you're really looking to get answered, we have cards on the back table. Write your question, make sure your email address is on it, and if we can respond to it in a relatively concise way, we can do that. It's also going to be an opportunity for us to build Q&A on our website so that other people who have similar questions can go to our website and check out the facts, right? So that would be a benefit to us as well as hopefully to you if you participated
Because
in that way.
lots of common themes about school questions and things like that. Thank you. Just want to say thank you to everybody.